and Pregnant and Parenting Students, hosted by the National Women's Law Center. My name is Amanda Hooper, and I'm the Outreach Manager at the National Women's Law Center, and I'll be your moderator today. We just have a few housekeeping notes before we get started. First, all lines will be on mute during today's webinar. We will be taking questions after our experts are finished with their presentations, and you can submit a question by typing it into the designated area on your webinar toolbar. Please also note that we'll be recording this webinar, and you will receive a link to the recording of the presentation as well as to the PowerPoint slides within the next couple days. Finally, please note that this webinar is intended for advocates and those interested in the subject and is not intended for press purposes. Today you'll hear from Lara Kaufmann of the National Women's Law Center and then Gloria Malone from Teen Mom NYC. After Lara and Gloria have finished their presentations, we'll open the floor for questions. Okay, Lara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks everyone for being here today. We are so excited to have you, and we've got a wonderful presentation in store. I'm really excited about this. So before I get started, let me introduce Gloria Malone, who is my co-presenter. Gloria is a creator of TeenMomNYC.com, a co-founder of the No Teen Shame movement, and a contributing writer of the Echoing Ida, a Black women's writing collective. She often speaks at colleges, universities, legislative briefings, and nonprofits about the intersections of teenage motherhood, policy, and race. And we're thrilled to have her with us today. And I'm Lara Kaufmann. I am Senior Counsel and Director of Education Policy for at-risk students here at the National Women's Law Center. And my work focuses on improving educational outcomes for at-risk youth, particularly girls of color and girls from low-income communities. And, of course, one facet of that is ensuring that pregnant and parenting students can succeed in school. So that's why we're here today. Without further ado, we'll get started. So we're going to do a couple of polls first just to get a sense of where you all are coming from. Amanda, can you go ahead and put up the poll questions? Okay. So for some reason, I can't see the question.
So the one that's up right now, Lara, is how would you identify yourself?
Oh, okay. So you can choose any one of these options to give us a sense of how you identify yourself. Amanda, how do I see the poll question? Why am I having trouble here?
I'm not sure, but I can, since it's giving you a problem, I can just let you know what the options are and how people are responding.
That'd be great.
So
okay.
The different options are student, including a student parent, teacher or school administrator, non-student advocate, or service provider. Looks like we have about 35% service providers, 29 non-student advocates, 33% teacher or school administrator, and 3% student, including student parents.
Great. Okay, now we will go to the next polling question.
So this polling question is, how familiar are you with Title IX? Are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, not at all familiar, or a Title IX professional? So we'll just give people a couple more seconds to respond. So far, it looks like about 60% of people are somewhat familiar. That's going down a little bit. About 30% are very familiar, about 10% are not at all familiar, and about 5% are Title IX professionals.
Okay, great. That just helps to give us an understanding of everybody's background and where you're all coming from. And thank you, Amanda, for your help with that. I appreciate it. Now we're going to move on to the substance of the presentation. An overview, just to let you know what to expect. I'm going to talk about schools' obligations to provide equal opportunities for pregnant and parenting students. I'm going to give some examples of discrimination that violate Title IX. I am going to mention the steps you can take if you encounter a problem at your school or you know of a student who is having a problem or a school policy that violates the law. And then I'll turn it over to Gloria for the second half of the presentation. Gloria is going to talk about her experiences and the student movement that she has been working to build and her recommendations for assisting young parents. So let's get started. Title IX is a very broad statute, and it simply says that nobody can be denied the benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity on the basis of sex if that education program or activity gets federal financial assistance. And just so you know, for Title IX purposes, it's enough if your program gets $1 of federal funding. All public schools get federal funding, and many, many private schools do, particularly at the college level where students get federal financial aid to attend private colleges. That is enough to count for Title IX compliance purposes. And regardless of which aspect of your program gets the federal funding, your entire program has to comply with this civil rights law. That has been the law since 1972, and there were regulations that were issued around that time, a few years later, by the Department of Education that specifically address how schools must provide equal opportunities to pregnant and parenting students, and I'll get into those in a moment. The main agency charged with enforcing Title IX is the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, and our shorthand for that is OCR, and you'll hear me refer to OCR a number of times throughout this presentation. OCR has the authority to conduct its own compliance reviews where it looks at districts or schools and assesses whether or not they are in compliance with the law. And that could be any aspect of the law, not just pregnancy. And they also take complaints from individuals or from organizations. And so if you file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, as we're going to discuss, they will investigate and determine whether or not there's a violation. So we can get into what that means and what the outcome could be. The basic rules under Title IX are that schools cannot discriminate based on pregnancy or any related medical conditions, which includes childbirth, false pregnancy, termination of pregnancy, recovery from any of those conditions. And that applies to both academic offerings and extracurricular programs. And schools have to treat students who are pregnant or have pregnancy-related conditions the same way that they would treat students who are affected by a temporary disability. The other piece is that they have to excuse all pregnancy-related absences for as long as the student's doctor says is medically necessary. So for classes and activities, what does this mean? Schools have to allow pregnant and parenting students to continue participating in their classes and activities. There cannot be a presumption that when a student gets pregnant, she's somehow fragile and cannot continue going to school or, you know, is a failure and shouldn't continue going to school. It's very important that those stereotypes be broken down because we know they still exist in some places. Any special programs that are offered for pregnant and parenting students have to be voluntary, and that's truly voluntary. You can't even strongly try to steer a student in that direction. And those programs have to offer the same range of educational opportunities that the student would get at their home school. And schools may be required to make some reasonable adjustments based on the student's need. So the examples we give here are examples OCR has given, like a larger desk or a temporary elevator pass. Another adjustment I can think of is in the school uniform policy. If a student can no longer fit into the school uniform and they can't provide her with a larger one. Schools have to excuse pregnancy-related absences for as long as medically necessary. And we see a lot of confusion here among schools. One thing that schools have to do is make sure that their teachers know that this is a requirement. A lot of times schools will say, well, it's up to each individual professor, and this is at the college level, to determine his or her absence policy, and we can't impose restrictions on that? Well, the truth is that it's the school's responsibility to make sure all of its staff is complying with Title IX and ensuring that students' civil rights are protected. So schools absolutely have to train their teachers and make sure they know what's required. And it's a very simple rule. If students need to be absent from school for medical reasons, it has to be excused. And any services that are provided to students with temporary disabilities, like homebound instruction, have to be made available on the same basis to students with pregnancy-related complications. What goes along with this is the requirement that schools allow students to make up work that they miss when they are absent, because just allowing the student to be absent but then not allowing her to make up the work or get the credit she would have gotten had she been in class would be essentially penalizing her for missing that class. So that goes along with it. What the guidance says is at the end of the leave period, the students have to be returned to the status they held before the leave began. That's very clear from the regulations. Students have to be given an opportunity to make up the work they miss, and if grading is based in part on class attendance or participation, you cannot give a student a 0 for that. She still has to be able to make up that credit in some way. We also see schools make assumptions that students who get pregnant can no longer participate in extracurricular activities, and that's not true at all. It really is between the student and her doctor to determine what, if any, restrictions she has. Also, schools cannot exclude pregnant students from holding leadership positions or getting honors. This is something that we've seen before. It's actually been challenged in federal court because many schools at one point did not want students who'd been pregnant to participate in the Honor Society. And in fact, courts have said, you can't do that. You can't exclude them. If they're otherwise eligible for the Honor Society, the fact that they were pregnant should have no bearing on that. And it's the same for leadership positions and senior superlatives and homecoming queen, etc. So that's important. Harassment, I think most people know Title IX prohibits sexual harassment, but that includes harassment based on pregnancy or any of the related medical conditions. So for example, if a student who is pregnant is starting to get teased or people are spreading sexual rumors about her, students are propositioning her, gesturing inappropriately, or calling her slut or whore or something like that, that is harassment that the school has to address right away because it could create a hostile environment and make it difficult for her to continue her education, which would be a violation of her civil rights. In terms of policies and procedures, Title IX requires these things for all Title IX purposes, not just for pregnancy. Schools have to have a non-discrimination policy that makes it clear that sex discrimination is prohibited. They have to have complaint procedures that they make clear to the students and staff and parents so people know if they have a problem what to do about it. Schools also have to designate what's called a Title IX coordinator, which is an employee who is responsible for overseeing the school's Title IX compliance, and they have to make sure, schools have to make sure that the entire school community knows who that person is and how to reach that person, including students and parents, so that so it can be effective. That way the Title IX coordinator can find out when there are problems and try to resolve them before it gets to the point where a complaint has to be filed. And we already talked about some adjustments to their regular policies. One adjustment would be allowing a student who's pregnant to take more frequent bathroom breaks. Another example I can think of is adjusting the truancy policy, because some schools have a policy that no matter what reason it is you're absent, if you're absent, for example, 5 or more times, you're going to be truant and sent to truancy court. But in this case, there may be very legitimate reasons why the student's absent, and schools need to look at those underlying reasons before they just assume that a student is in violation of their attendance laws. So that's something schools need to consider carefully. Title IX is a floor, and that is the bare minimum that schools must do, but states and districts can go even further than Title IX. And many years ago, advocates worked to get a regulation passed in New York City that specifically stated that the principal in each building is accountable for ensuring that pregnant and parenting students in that school are not discriminated against. And it talked also about access to information and services and attending schools in your area versus out of your area. The discrimination that we see most often tends to fall into 4 general categories. The first is the environment of discouragement, and that is that students, some students just generally don't feel like they're getting any guidance or support or encouragement from their schools, but it can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is active hostility. Students who feel welcome at school are going to be motivated to stick with it and work harder. Unfortunately, many students get the message loud and clear when it becomes known that they're pregnant that they're no longer welcome. And some of the ways this happens is for them to be blatantly discouraged from staying in school or steered into alternative programs that are inferior or GED programs, allowing student harassment to continue even when the school knows about it and should be doing something to address it, stigmatizing students, forbidding them from walking at graduation, or, as I said earlier, excluding students from honors to which they otherwise would be entitled. Those are all examples of things that violate Title IX and create this general environment of discouragement, which is exactly the opposite of what pregnant students need. Another example is the rigid application of rules, and I talked about the truancy laws. States need we would recommend that states or districts adopt a very clear policy about absences for pregnant and parenting students, because even though it's already the federal law, many people aren't aware of that, and we need to make it as clear as possible for people. I mentioned a school uniform, and these are real examples of students that we have heard from or learned about. Turning pregnant students away at the door who are not dressed in uniform is a terrible policy and makes no sense. I mean, you don't want to discourage a student who's made it all the way to school from coming in the door. Also, unequal alternatives would violate the law. So schools don't have to offer alternative programs for pregnant students, but if they do, those programs have to be voluntary and have to offer quality, comparable education programs and activities. And the New York City P schools that were shut down several years ago were exactly what advocates like us feared might happen. Those students who went to those schools were getting child care, they were in school with their peers, but they weren't earning credits toward graduation, they weren't graduating, they weren't transitioning back into their mainstream schools, they weren't getting job skills, and they didn't have any sort of rigorous offerings, and they were doing things like quilting for geometry class. So that was a real problem, and New York City shut those down and has had the challenge ever since of integrating those students back into the mainstream school environment while still ensuring them access to services. Homebound instruction is something, again, that schools don't have to offer. We do think that it's advisable because it really can make the difference for a student who's out of school for an extended period of time. And some states do offer it, some districts offer it, and where it's offered to students who have medical conditions that keep them out of school, it has to also be offered to pregnant students who can't go to school. So that includes recovery from childbirth or recovery from a miscarriage, for example. So in New York City, I know the regulation states that pregnant or parenting students can request homebound instruction with a doctor's note. Whatever requirements are imposed on other students who are applying for homebound instruction can also be the requirements that pregnant and parenting students have to face, but they can't be required to meet a higher burden. The problem is that in some places there's a long wait list for homebound instruction. in some places the homebound instruction is not of good quality, and those students might get only an hour or two a week of instruction, which may not be enough to help them stay on track for graduation. So schools need to think hard about this, but at a minimum, students should be able to get their work sent home and get some guidance from their teachers about how to stay on track. Some other concerns that come up are breastfeeding needs, and lactation is a pregnancy-related medical condition, but a lot of schools are not providing students with breaks in order to express breast milk. They're not allowing them access to a clean private space that's not a restroom in order to pump. And that can pose a real hardship for student mothers. It can lead to infection and other physical discomfort. It can distract them from their classwork and impact their ability to learn. And it sends a message to students that you've got to make a choice between being a mother and being a student. And that's not at all what we want the message to be. We need students to succeed, particularly if they have a family to support. We want to support them. And really, this is something that would be very simple for schools to do and would make a big difference. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that women breastfeed for up to, I think they say, at least the first year of a child's life. It's supposed to be better for the mother and better for the child, and schools have to get on board with that. It's a public health issue. If you think your schools are doing the wrong thing or denying you your rights, here are some links to materials that you can use to your advantage. We have a number of materials on the NWLC Pregnant and Parenting Students page that's linked here. These are also links to the OCR guidance documents on pregnant and parenting students. There's a Dear Colleague letter, a pamphlet that has helpful FAQs about supporting the academic success of pregnant and parenting students, and a Know Your Rights document for students. And those were all issued in 2013, so they're fairly recent. They're very user-friendly and very helpful in laying out exactly what schools' obligations are. And then, of course, we would recommend that schools go beyond what's simply required and think really hard about what they can do to support the success of these students and do that. The law applies to colleges too, as I mentioned, and we had a couple of successful settlements in recent years against colleges that had discriminated. And in the CUNY case, we were able to get not only relief for our client, but also some important policy changes that the school said they would apply to their entire CUNY system. So all of the CUNY schools across the New York City's five boroughs. One was a memo on Title IX and pregnancy that was distributed to all of their faculty and staff and other relevant departments. They put information in the student handbook and on the website about Title IX and pregnancy. They agreed to train their Title IX coordinators and directors of student affairs on the new policy, and they agreed to include information about Title IX and pregnancy in all of the Title IX trainings that they give to faculty and students. So that was a wonderful settlement. We got a similar settlement in our case against Logan College in St. Louis. So let's talk now about what you can do if there's a problem at your school. One thing you can do is contact your school's Title IX coordinator or your district's Title IX coordinator if there's not one designated at the school level. If you don't know who that is, you can ask and try to find out. Hopefully the Title IX coordinator will have had some training and will know what his or her responsibilities are and understand the law in this area, but that's not always the case. So don't be discouraged if your Title IX coordinator tells you that, in fact, this is not a violation of Title IX and that you don't have rights, because that Title IX coordinator could simply be wrong. Another thing you can do is reach out to a trusted adult at school and see if they would be willing to help advocate on your behalf. Or you can contact us at the National Women's Law Center, and at the end of this webinar, I will give you my contact information. We often help people to get them resources that they can use to advocate for themselves. In some cases, we may be able to intervene and help advocate on their behalf, or refer them to another organization or another another attorney who might be able to do that. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to take all the cases that come through our doors, but we really do like to help people, and we take it very seriously. And so we try at least to refer people to others if we can't get involved ourselves. But a lot of times we find that what students need is just some guidance and a better understanding of what the law is. And sometimes when they go back to their school's administration and explain what the law is and that they think their rights are being violated, sometimes that's enough. And we've seen some great results from that. The other thing to keep in mind is that retaliation against you for reporting a Title IX violation is prohibited by law. And that's true not only for students who've complained about discrimination against themselves, it's true for anybody who complains about discrimination. So if you're the friend of a pregnant student and you make a complaint about pregnancy discrimination, you too are protected from retaliation under Title IX. If you're a teacher or a school counselor or a coach and you make a complaint or raise the possibility of a Title IX problem and then you experience retaliation, you're protected under the law. Now, what does that mean? Retaliation can take many, many forms. For students, it can include not allowing them to play in games, not allowing them to take certain exams, lowering their grade, not allowing them to participate in certain activities. For a faculty member or a staff member, it can include reduction in pay, demotion, some sort of violation on their record, or taking away some sort of responsibility that they have. So there are a lot of course, termination can also be a form of retaliation. There's, realistically, it can be scary to come forward with something like this, but the reason that the law says that Title IX prohibits retaliation is because if it didn't, the system would break down. If people didn't report these violations, and people didn't know what their rights were, then we would really not be able to address the discrimination, and the Supreme Court recognized that. If there are still problems after you try to resolve this in a non-confrontational way, you could consider filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. And here is some information, a phone number you can call, there's a website you can go to, and they have an online complaint form. You do not have to be a lawyer to file a complaint. You also don't have to be the person who's discriminated against to file it. You can file it if you're a teacher. You can file it if you're a friend. You can file it if you know someone who's been discriminated against, although it's often especially effective if the person who's discriminated against files the complaint, because that story can be very powerful in demonstrating how the school is in violation of the law. And it's a simple form to fill out, and you just document the ways you think your rights have been violated, or the ways you think your school is in violation. And you should include any documentation you have that supports your claim, like emails between you and your teacher, or a copy of the school policy that is discriminatory. One thing to keep in mind is that you have to file your complaint within 180 days of the discrimination. Now, sometimes that discrimination is ongoing, like if there's a policy or practice in effect that discriminates. And in those cases, if it's ongoing, then the 180-day clock keeps starting over every day that there's a discriminatory policy in place. So you don't have to worry as much about the timing. Another thing is that the OCR case manual says that OCR offices can waive the 180-day filing requirement if good cause is shown. So it's possible that even if you miss the 180-day window, but you explain to OCR why you missed that window, they may waive that requirement and take your complaint anyway. Unfortunately, they don't waive it as often as I think they should, and so I think it's important to keep in mind that that 180-day window is there. Another option, of course, is to go into federal court and file a lawsuit under Title IX. It's a very different option, though. There are requirements that only the student or the family of the student who is discriminated against can file the lawsuit. You have to be aggrieved yourself. You can't do it on behalf of someone else. The time limitations are different. It depends on the state you live in, and it could be anywhere from 1 year to 6 years depending on the state. And it's a more expensive process because you have to pay in order to file, which you don't have to do with OCR. And you may want to seek the help of a lawyer because in order to make a good case, legal representation can be really helpful. Now that's true for OCR complaints too, I will say. You don't have to be a lawyer to file. It certainly doesn't hurt to have a lawyer, and it can help with your advocacy and with shaping your claim. But I think you would definitely want to consult with a lawyer before you file a lawsuit, even if you don't use a lawyer to file a lawsuit, in order to find out whether you have a good case, because you wouldn't want to go forward on this path if you don't have a strong case, because it will just waste your time and money. Now I'm going to turn it over to Gloria, who is going to share her experiences. Gloria, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I am.
Gloria. I think I hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lara, for your part of the presentation. It was very informational, and it helped me, and I learned quite a few things myself. I am very excited to be here speaking with you all about Title IX rights, as well as my personal experience with some Title IX violations and things that I've learned along the way. I became pregnant at 15 years old, and before then I was in high school, right? I was an honors student in high school. I was involved in extracurricular activities, and I fit the mold of the girl who doesn't get pregnant. You know, there's this notion that only a certain type of person gets pregnant or a certain type of girl gets pregnant, and by outside just like societal markers, I look like the girl who would never experience an unintended teenage pregnancy. But I was also a young woman who was living in poverty. Poverty is one of the biggest indicators of unintended teenage pregnancy. I was also dealing with depression and feelings of isolation before becoming pregnant, which I think is really important to talk about the story before one becomes a pregnant teen, because things that happened before influence things that happen in the future, right? So my story begins well before experiencing an unintended pregnancy. So I was in high school as an AP, honors and AP student. I was in extracurricular activities, and I didn't fit that mold of the girl who becomes pregnant. But I did. And once I began to show students, faculty, staff really changed the ways in which they interacted with me. So during my pregnancy, I would have teachers who would ignore me. I would have teachers who would give me dirty looks. I would experience faculty and staff on school not wanting to talk to me anymore about anything that had to do with my education. I think the biggest and most obvious time was when I was wanting to speak with my guidance counselor, my academic guidance counselor, about applying for colleges, and I would put several reminders in her mailbox that I wanted to speak with her, and she never ever had time to speak with me. Or anytime I would walk into the office and she was in the office, she would be conveniently walking out of the office. So here I am, a pregnant teen who wants to discuss college and what colleges I want to, how to apply to a college, how to fill out forms for colleges and different scholarships that may be available to me. And my academic advisor was having none of it once I began to show in my pregnancy. The only way I got her to speak to me was by putting a note in her mailbox that said I was going to drop out of school. And it was funny enough, she comes into my AP Lit class and she says she wants to talk to me about wanting to drop out. When we get back to her office, she's like, why do you want to drop out? And I looked her in the eye and I said, I don't want to drop out. You just won't talk to me about colleges, so I didn't know what else to do. That's not okay. It should never get to a point where a pregnant or parenting student is trying to access information that they are entitled to, that they have the right to, and having to resort to, lying or any of those things to just get basic attention is not all right. In my case, I was always, I always enjoyed school. It provided a break from things that were going on at home, and it allowed me to feel my age. And when I became pregnant, that didn't change. I still enjoyed going to school. I still enjoyed the break of being able to just be a student within a school setting. And pregnancy is actually a motivator to continue and complete one's education. Studies have found that pregnant and parenting teen mothers say that their pregnancy or their children motivate them to want to continue school and to stay in school or to re-enroll in school if they had dropped out of school prior to becoming pregnant or becoming parents. So I have a really hard time with the statistics that says, don't become a teen parent because about 50% graduate high school. But when your guidance counselor doesn't want to speak to you, when your teachers are creating a hostile learning environment, and when you're experiencing harassment from students at school, and there's no one that you can turn to, or you feel that there was no one you can turn to get advice or help because, again, the staff at the school isn't being really nice. Maybe your parents aren't being very helpful either. Some neighbors were too dropping out because of these environments that are created by individuals who are gatekeepers in this pregnant or parenting teen's future. So about 30 to 35% of the young women who were part of the study said that they were motivated to continue and complete their education. When I became pregnant, I had the highest GPA I've ever accomplished. And that, I don't share that to sound like an exceptional teen parent. I share that because it's common. I've spoken to several other pregnant and parenting teen students who were able to stay in school, and they all agree that when they were pregnant, they were very motivated, and some of them did achieve the highest GPA they've ever had. Some of them didn't, and that's 100% okay, and that's fine as well. When we talk about Title IX, and we talk about pregnant and parenting teens completing their education, their high school education, we have to take into account that educational push-out is very, very prevalent. The Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health has a story series of young women that they interviewed who were forced out of their school, their prior school, and are attending different educational facilities now. And a lot of the women, a lot of the pregnant and parenting young women in the stories share that, because they didn't fit their uniform, they weren't able to go to school. Or because they were pregnant and the school convinced them that there was another program that would be better for them, that they left the school that they were at, and they were actually enjoying being at and didn't want to leave. But school faculty and staff made it seem as if them leaving was the best thing for them and not the best thing for the school's reputation. It's also very interesting that when we talk about educational push-out, that the other side of one staying in school and completing their education is often met with a form of backlash. So there was a story a few months ago where a yearbook in Arizona featured 2 pages dedicated to pregnant and parenting students who were graduating that year. And it caused a very big uproar with the school and some students and members of the community, because they felt that this celebration of graduation for pregnant and parenting students was somehow glorifying pregnant and parenting students accomplishments. And I think that there's a double-edged sword for pregnant and parenting students, because we are told that we're not going to finish our education, and we face all these barriers by gatekeepers, family, friends, complete strangers, principals, all of these individuals in our lives. So when we finally graduate from high school and or college, but mostly high school, there's often backlash. So what type of message are we as a society sending to pregnant and parenting students once they do accomplish their goals? So I want to take this moment to say that I feel pregnant and parenting teen students have the right to be celebrated for accomplishing their goals, regardless of what stage they are at in life. And part of supporting pregnant and parenting teens is to celebrate their accomplishments as well. There was a really recent article that one of my No Teen Shame co-founders, Natasha Viana, wrote for RH Reality Check, and it is entitled "Pregnant and Parenting Students Can and Should Enforce Their Title IX Rights." I think that it's a great article that many of us should read and take away some of her major talking points in it, and her experiences with helping other pregnant and parenting students learn about their Title IX rights and how to enforce their rights. Educational push-out and punishment was something I touched on earlier, but I really wanted to speak on it again. Like I said, poverty is one of the leading causes of pregnancy, of unintended teenage pregnancy. And educational push-out results, so let me back up a second. One of the things that we often hear is that getting an education is the first step of getting out of poverty. So if we have a young woman who is living in poverty prior to becoming pregnant, and then she experiences an unintended teenage pregnancy, and her school begins to push her out because of her pregnancy, we need to acknowledge the fact that the school is placing now two generations, the parent and the child, into deeper poverty, but by not creating an environment where the pregnant and parenting student is able to continue their education to get one step closer to being out of poverty. And I think that's something we really need to think about as a society, is how educational push-out through the violation of Title IX rights perpetuates the cycle of poverty, which has several negative outcomes in life, as well as experiencing more discrimination because of poverty, discrimination because of race, and discrimination because of being a pregnant or parenting teen. One of the latest reports from the Black Girls Matter report actually highlighted how teen parents, black female teen parents, experience exceptionally high rates of educational push-out, and how it is difficult for them to continue their education because of the over-policing that takes place on schools for young women and young black women in America, as well as the intersections of being a young black girl who was pregnant and parenting and trying to finish school while facing educational push-out, as well as gender and racial discrimination. One of the articles I recently wrote for RH Reality Check was the need for family leave laws to include teen parents. As a society, we were talking a lot about maternity leave laws and how the families can benefit from maternity leave laws, and oftentimes we leave teen parents out of this discussion, and I think that this discussion needs to be a lot broader and include pregnant and parenting teens to help, in order to make sure that leave laws are helping all families within the United States. Again, I would like to bring up the ICA story series of young women who share their stories when it comes to educational push-out, some barriers that they face now because the schools the alternative schools that they're attending now are further from their home. So one young woman discusses having to take 2 buses in the Chicago winters with her child in a stroller to go to school. I can't think of anything that screams wanting education and to finish their education more than a young mother having to get up in the morning, pack a suitcase, a diaper bag in the middle of brutal Chicago winters to take public transportation to school. This only speaks to how much young parents want to continue and to obtain their high school and college education. So what can schools do to help? One article that I wrote, How to Make Education Accessible to Student Parents, gives 5 ways of how schools can make education more accessible to student parents. And some of those things include lactation rooms, of how Lara spoke to how breastfeeding is often not supported in society, and especially not in high school or college settings for pregnant and parenting students. Schools should also absolutely inform young parents of their Title IX rights. I did not know about my Title IX rights until I was about 21 years old, and I had my daughter at 15 years old. That was a 6-year lapse of time where I had no idea that I had federal rights that protected myself from discrimination, and that would allow me to actually miss school because of pregnancy related absences that were necessary, but I didn't know were covered under Title IX rights. So I think one of the things that's really helpful here, since we have a very diverse crowd on the webinar, is to give tips on how you can help. And I think the biggest thing is to start where you are at. And to remember that you don't have to be that person in that position to do something for a teen parent, student teen parent who's experiencing discrimination. In my experience, some teachers were great, some weren't. My school did not inform me that I would be graduating with honors at all. I found that out through a teacher who was amazing and let me know once I walked into class that I was going to be graduating with honors. There was no letter sent from the school. There was no type of acknowledgement for my graduating with honors. And that wasn't that teacher's position, right? They weren't the individual who worked in the administrative office of the school that got that information. But he took it upon himself to congratulate me for graduating with honors, even though that wasn't under his title, right? Another thing is I was very fortunate to have chorus and drama teachers who were very nice and wonderfully supportive, and they allowed me to pump breast milk in one of the practicing rooms of the chorus department's hall at the high school. That was amazing, and that was something that was them helping me from where they were at. So definitely reach out and help any way that you can, and inform all pregnant and parenting young people that you know that they have Title IX rights, whether they are in school or whether they're not in school. I think in many cases, knowing that you have federal rights if you're out of school may motivate you to go back and continue your education because you know what your rights are and you'll feel more informed and more empowered to continue your education. I think another part of supporting young parents and their education is legislative policy that has been introduced. So you have the Real Education for Healthy Youth Act, which is a bill that aims to make a federal mandate for comprehensive sexual health education that is age appropriate for all young people in the United States. Everyone needs sexual health education that is comprehensive and LGBT inclusive and accurate. So that is one way to help all young people and to help pregnant and parenting students as well. as well as the Pregnant and Parenting Student Access to Education Act. This is so necessary because it establishes a federal mandate for pregnant and parenting students to have education, access to education. Like Lara said, Title IX is the bare minimum, it is the floor, and there is so much more that we can do on city and state levels to help pregnant and parenting students. Also, donate. If you donate diapers to any local daycare that helps pregnant and parenting students, or just helps young people, parenting people in general, right? You can donate diapers, donate time, donate knowledge, donate any type of information that you have, as well as, monetary donations help, but I think there are several other ways people can give. And it's always important to elevate the voices of young parents at every chance that you get. If you are an individual who works within a nonprofit setting or working on policy briefings and legislative hearings, bring in a young parent to speak about their experiences. And this doesn't need to be just the experiences of young people in education. It can be the experiences of young teen parents in affordable housing. It can be young teen parents in, healthcare access. Make sure to bring in the voices of young and young parents at every opportunity you get. I wanted to share this image from No Teen Shame, a movement that I'm part of with 6 other former teenage mothers. I think it's really helpful, and it is how to be an ally to young parents. I think it would be great for all of us to be able to read through the 5 points, really challenge our ways of the preconceived notions that we have of young parents, teen and young parents, and be sure to check out the No Teen Shame Tumblr for more images and information about the work that we're doing for young pregnant and parenting teens, as well as young people in general. The Tumblr address is noteenshame.tumblr.com. And I also think it's great to talk about individuals who are getting things right. So New Mexico passed a family leave law which extends the rights of Title IX to pregnant and parenting students in New Mexico schools. Boston public schools also have a young parents sort of Bill of Rights of what I call it. It is it's a document that states that young parents have rights and that Boston public schools need to support young parents in their educational careers, and that in not doing so is a violation of Title IX rights, as well as a violation of the policy that is established in Boston public school settings. And that some of that work was also included young parents training individuals in public school settings about Title IX rights of pregnant and parenting students. I think that in my experiences in high school, having a select few teachers who encouraged me, who helped me by giving me a space to pump breast milk, who allowed an extra day or two for me to finish an assignment, who were willing to give me the makeup work that I was entitled to, but I didn't know I was entitled to because I was at a doctor's appointment related to my pregnancy. Those things are amazing, and if you could be that individual for a pregnant and parenting student teen, please make sure that you are genuinely supporting, encouraging, and informing them of their rights, and that you are helping them where they are at, and to not try to put conditions on helping teen parents. I think that's very necessary to help teen parents where they're at and help them get to where they want to be without forcing them or imposing your views onto them. So there is the link to the No Teen Chain Tumblr above and one of our visuals. And I really want to thank all of you for RSVPing, for logging on, and for all of the work that you do in supporting pregnant and parenting student parents and pregnant and parenting teens in general. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time for information or help, or to ask me how you can help young parents. And I really want to stress the fact that supporting young parents and supporting teen parents is absolutely necessary. It is the most radical and transformative thing you can do. And I also think it's really long-lasting change, because like I said, when we look at teen parents, we're dealing with two generations, the parent and their children. And I can't think of any way that you can help two generations in such a direct way, and with helping and supporting, encouraging pregnant and parenting teens. Because without support, I would not have been able to graduate college this past May and have my daughter by my side and watch me graduate from both high school and college. So thank you very much.
Gloria, thank you so much. That was fantastic, and we really appreciate your perspective and sharing your own story as well as all of your insight. So I want to open it up to questions now. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat box and send it over to us. And then Amanda can let us know what the questions are. But either of us is happy to take a question. And also you can see here that my contact information is here if you want to contact us after the webinar for any reason, or you learn of a situation that needs attention at a school or otherwise. But I was really struck, Gloria, by some of what you shared, and I love your description of helping pregnant and parenting teens as being radical and transformative, because I think you're right, and I'm always telling people this is you get a lot of bang for your buck, because it's a highly motivated population that can and will succeed given the right support and encouragement, and you're helping them and their children. So I don't see why more people aren't open to that. Do we have any questions, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Lara, and thanks, Gloria, both for your great presentations. There was a lot of great content, so we don't have a ton of time for questions, but we do have a couple here. And I just want to remind people that we will send around a link to the PowerPoint and the recording so that you can revisit slides and click on links and do all of that kind of stuff after the webinar as well. So there was a clarification in terms of what's required for a Title IX coordinator at the K-12 level. Is it just school districts, or is it school to school?
Okay, it's a great question, and what the law requires is that every recipient of federal funding designate a Title IX coordinator. It doesn't have to be that person's full-time job. It can be one of many responsibilities that they have, but typically really depends on what state you're talking about. In some places, they just designate somebody at the district level, but they still have to inform the student body at every school and the faculty and the teachers and the staff of who that person is. So you can designate somebody who's in the district office instead of somebody in your own school building. However, I strongly recommend that you designate somebody in the school building, and here's why. It is more likely that students will feel comfortable approaching that person if it's someone they know and if it's someone that they see on a regular basis. It's also easier for that person to witness any problematic conduct and get a sense of what the school climate is like. Much harder for someone in the district office who's not on site to have a sense of what's going on at school, and when you're not interacting with teachers, you're not interacting with students. And really, the key to avoiding complaints for you is to have somebody available who can help resolve things before they get out of hand. So it's in everybody's best interest, I think, to have somebody at the school level as well as at the district level. And that is certainly what we recommend. And I know some states have done more than others to encourage that and to ensure that everybody gets the right training. I would give a shout out to Connecticut in particular because their State Department of Education has done a great job developing the Title IX coordinators in that state.
Great, thanks. Lara, could you talk briefly about how athletics are impacted by Title IX and pregnant and parenting students?
Sure. So as I said during the presentation, there should be no automatic restrictions based on pregnancy. There are definitely going to be student athletes who get pregnant. It happens all the time. And if they and their doctor are comfortable with their continuing the same level of activity, which is often the case, then the school cannot second-guess that judgment and cannot impose restrictions on them unless the doctor imposes restrictions. And the school also can't require the student to prove that she's still fit to play unless that's something that they would require of any student with a temporary medical condition. So schools should tread carefully here. Certainly, they can trust that a student and her doctor can decide what is safe and what is not, and it's not for the school to decide that. That being said, there will be some cases where at some point, at least during the pregnancy, the student may have to cut back on her level of activity. Doesn't mean she should be kicked off the team. It doesn't mean that she shouldn't be guaranteed a spot next time around. It doesn't mean that she should be excluded from trying out, etc. So, you know, be careful, but Title IX certainly applies, and it's important that students be able to continue whatever activities keep them engaged in school. And if athletics is one of the things that's keeping them engaged and keeping them healthy and happy, then they should be allowed to continue that.
There's a question about, are there Title IX accommodations for student parents who are fathers? Can fathers, you know, absences be accommodated under Title IX, or are there other things that are available?
That's a great question. So what Title IX requires is that students cannot be treated differently based on sex when it comes to their parenting status. And what that means is if you are going to allow a student to miss school whenever her child is sick and can't go to daycare, then you can't say, well, that's okay for a female student but not for a male student. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex when it comes to parenting status. However, a lot of the Title IX regulations that talk about excused absences are really focused on the medical condition of pregnancy and related conditions like lactation, like childbirth, like recovery. And so those are just not going to apply to teen dads. We do encourage schools to be as flexible as possible and to encourage teen fathers to be involved in their children's lives, including, you know, we encourage them to excuse absences that are related to pregnancy medical appointments because it's a wonderful way for the teen father to get invested in the pregnancy and in the, you know, in his new role as a father. But it's not required, and so it's something that we do encourage and we think is really important as a matter of policy. Teen fathers also experience pressure to drop out, and so anything you can do to acknowledge their new role as fathers and encourage that, while at the same time encouraging them to stay in school and enabling them to both be a father and be in school and succeed, is critical.
Great. Thanks, Lara. I know we're a few minutes over time, and we have a lot of good questions. So I'll take maybe one or two more, and then people can maybe follow up with any additional questions. Are there any good examples of schools or policies that support absences or accommodations after a child is born for student parents?
There are. For example, the state of North Carolina requires schools not just to excuse absences related to pregnancy, but also absences related to the illness of a student's child. And that's important because when your baby's sick, not only do you want to be there helping them recover and taking them to the doctor, but they can't go to daycare. They can't, and that could be for several days. I mean, this has been a tough winter, and I know that my child had the flu, and I had the flu, and if I'd been in school and only allowed 5 absences, I would have been kicked out by now. But schools need to be flexible on things like that and look at the underlying reason for the absence. So I think North Carolina has a good policy on that. I think there are certain schools that are good about that. I know, for example, there's a program in Corpus Christi, Texas, that is part of a mainstream high school, but it's a program that provides support for pregnant and parenting teens within that high school, and I think they've made great strides toward doing whatever it takes to keep students engaged when they have a baby. So that's another example I would give. I'm sure there are others. Gloria, do you have any to share?
I think that
Gloria, you might be on mute.
Can you,
but I know there are others.
No, Lara, she's talking. I think she's off mute at this point.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think I have to go back to the New Mexico family leave law because it covers both. It extends some rights to teen parents, teen fathers as well, and it does allocate extra days each semester for parenting teens for their child's sickness, as well as if they have any lasting effects from delivery and childbirth and bearing. So New Mexico has that, and as well as some alternative, not alternative, I don't really like the word alternative, sorry, but other educational programs that work within traditional public school settings and out. So Allie's House does offer, Allie's House in Texas does have rights for, does have programs that they have within their network for teen parents. Like they have, they do have a maternity leave time for anyone who is part of their educational programming.
Great. Do we have one last question, Amanda?
Yes. So there are a couple questions about breastfeeding accommodations that I'm going to try and roll into one question for you to answer. So I guess we'll make this a two-parter. It says that in terms of breastfeeding accommodations, it was noted that no court has ruled on this in relation to Title IX. Are you aware of any pending cases or specific guidelines in this area? And also, as the second part, is there a policy in place for schools to designate places for students to breastfeed or pump?
So I will say that there could be some state law policies that I'm not aware of because this is the kind of thing that typically is governed by state law. But at the federal level, there's not a policy that requires that. However, in the Affordable Care Act, the law is very clear for certain employers that they have to provide a clean space that's not a restroom for employees to express breast milk and provide breaks of a sufficient duration for the employee to pump. And so we would argue that to the extent schools are already providing this space and accommodation for teachers or other staff members, that they could make that available as well to the students who are lactating and breastfeeding. But I'm not aware of a policy that is clear on that at this point in terms of students. And I'm also, you know, I don't know of pending cases to answer your question about that.
Great. Thank you, Lara, and thank you, Gloria, again for your great presentations and all the information that you provided to us through the presentations and also through the Q&A. And thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. Again, we'll post the link soon to the webinar recording and the slides so you can revisit what we've gone over today and share with others who you think may also be interested. And with that, I will thank both of our presenters again and conclude the webinar. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you all.